So recently, I've been using a lot of Goo Gottis, Goo Planes, Goo Ships, Goo FOs in my ranked matches, and that's exactly what I designed the tech for. And I've been getting mixed reviews on it against people I play against, I guess. And this is fine. Some people say, "Oh, I like how you use the Goo ship" or whatever. But then there's some people that are like, Goose Ship is an exploit and you're exploiting the game or whatever. So this video, I want to talk about, is Goose Ship an exploit or is it not? Obviously, there might not be a definitive answer to this, and I don't think there is because there's a lot of vague rules and whatever that Embark has put in place. It's hard to tell exactly what's a bug or an exploit or whatever. But I will give my best case for both sides and hopefully let you guys decide on your own. So let's get right into it. What is a GOO ship? Here is a clip demonstrating what a GOO ship is. Go. Get the GOO ship ready. It's ready. I'm getting cooked though. Like, what the hell? What the? This guy knows how to spread his goo. Yeah, I mean, I'll try. And as you saw there, it's basically using the gravity cube to bring up a goo ship or goo platform and using the goo gun to sort of propel this goo platform across the sky. And basically the idea is that this platform carries people, things, but yeah, basically it's a movement tool that is created using gadgets and specializations. And this GOO ship or whatever has been very controversial because people are scared that it might get patched out by Embark because it seems like it's not supposed to be part of the game. And that brings me to my next point. What is an exploit? And so I went around Embark's website looking for an answer to this, and I came across this page called Anti-Cheat Frequently Asked Questions. And the only thing that seemed to be related to the GOO ship or somewhat related would be number 6, exploiting bugs and glitches to gain an unfair advantage. And so what does this really mean? And what they say here, I mean, it's very short. They say exploiting refers to using known or unknown bugs, glitches, or unintended game mechanics to gain an unfair advantage, including map exploits or unintended item duplications. And notice how they say known or unknown bugs, glitches, or unintended game mechanics. Even if they don't even know if it's a bug or not, or we don't know if it's a bug or not, it's still banned. So it's a little bit confusing, and it could be the reason why it's very unclear why the GOO ship is an exploit or not an exploit. But one thing that is sort of clear is that unintended game mechanics, which is something we can kind of prove or disprove because they say what items are supposed to do what and stuff like that. And in this last part regarding the unfair advantage, that's also a little bit vague. What counts as an unfair advantage? What counts as an advantage? What counts as a disadvantage? But this very last part, including map exploits or unintended item duplications, these things don't seem to be related to the GOO ship at all, so we can just kind of ignore that. And that brings us to the next part. What are the developers' intentions? And I could just end the video here just saying, oh wow, it's so vague, blah blah blah, but I went a little deeper and looked at every patch notes since the beginning of the game. And looking at these patch notes, I only picked out the ones that are related to the GOO ship, and then from there we can kind of see what are the developers' intention regarding stuff that involves the GOO ship. And then we can maybe decide or figure out if these things are intended game mechanics or not intended game mechanics, or if they are bugs or not bugs. All right, so let's look at patch 2.0, and this is when the anti-gravity cube first comes out, and they leave a little description here in the patch notes about the anti-gravity cube. They say, a deployable cube for the heavy build that manipulates gravity in its immediate area. When activated, it lifts contestants and objects up and can be used as both a traversal tool and as an obstacle for enemy teams. Be mindful that destroying the cube will remove the reverse gravity zone. And so this is important because it tells us what the gravity cube is supposed to do. While this might not specifically talk about use in the GOO ship or anything, I do think it's a very good way to sort of gauge what the developer's intention with the gravity cube is. and whether that can apply to the GOO ship or not. In patch 2.4, they fixed an issue where some objects, such as barricades, could travel upwards too quickly when affected by the anti-gravity cube. And while this change is not really directly related to the GOO ship, because it seems like they are talking about the anti-gravity cube just lifting up detached objects such as these in general without it being attached together. I think it's important to note that they mentioned some objects such as barricades, and to better clarify what they mean by objects such as barricades, they mean objects that can be placed, such as zip lines, jump pads, APS, and barricades. In patch 2.8, another update to the anti-gravity cube was released. They posted, "We made the cube heavier so that it doesn't get pushed as easily when hit by other objects." So looking at this, we can kind of assume that the devs don't really want the anti-gravity cube to be moved very easily when hit by other objects. And taking in mind that patch 2.4 highlighted objects as barricades, we can also assume that objects here also means placeables such as barricades. They also fixed a bug where objects would lift much faster than intended when they were attached together. And I think what they were referring to is when a bunch of barricades are placed on the same GOO platform, the anti-gravity cube would lift all of them up, increasing the speed, which is not what was intended. And so they fixed that, and now when multiple barricades are affected by the gravity cube on the same GOO platform, it goes up at a normal speed. And it seems like this fix was directly correlated to floating platforms such as GOO, which could be related to the GOO ship. This also prevents an exploit in which the cube could be carried upwards together with the objects it's lifting, causing entire structures to traverse upwards into the sky endlessly. And this can be interpreted in many ways, which I will get more into later. So with all the evidence and information laid out, we can start to build an argument for why GOO ship is an exploit. And so looking at patch 2.0, we can see that the gravity cube is meant to be a traversal tool, but probably not in the way that the GOO ship is a traversal tool. As you can see in the little video that comes with the description of the anti-grav cube, you can see that what they mean by traversal tool is by going up and down within the gravity cube. And this serves to prove that this is what the devs mean by traversal tool, and not as a GOO ship that can go across the whole map. In patch 2.4, we can also kind of see that GOO ship is an exploit because the devs have an idea of how high they want the gravity cube to push things up. So when they fixed an issue where some objects could travel upwards too quickly when affected by the anti-gravity cube, we know that the devs have an intention with how high objects can go upwards with the anti-gravity cube. And with the GOO ship going up infinitely, it seems like this is going against the devs' intentions and thus is a bug. And in patch 2.8, we get more fixes that seem to limit the ability of the anti-gravity cube. They made it heavier so that it doesn't get pushed as easily when hit by other objects, which means that the devs have an intention to have the anti-gravity cube not be moved very easily, which the GOO ship moves very far. And you can argue that this is only specifically when it's hit by barricades and such, but we can probably assume that they mean by any object other than barricades and such, which includes GOO or debris on the ground, because why would the devs only want these specific objects to not push the anti-gravity cube, but GOO be able to push the gravity cube and such like that? And in the second part of patch 2.8, where they fixed a bug where objects would lift much faster than intended when they were attached together, this is very much in the same vein as 2.4, where they have an ideal situation where the anti-gravity cube would lift at a certain rate, thus keeping a limitation on what the anti-gravity cube can do, which sets the expectation the anti-gravity cube shouldn't be lifting things very high or very far. And the part where they say this also prevents an exploit in which the cube could be carried upwards together with the object it's listing, causing entire structures to traverse upwards into the sky endlessly. This seems like a very direct statement saying that it's an exploit when the cube is carried upwards together with the object it's lifting. And so any type of anti-gravity cube that goes up endlessly or can go up with the object it's lifting is an exploit, which seems very true here in the context of a GOO ship. And that's sort of my best argument that GOO ship is an exploit, but I do have an argument for GOO ship not being an exploit in relation to these patch notes. So for patch 2.0, the anti-gravity cube is described as a deployable cube that manipulates gravity in its immediate area, and this happens in the GOO ship. The gravity cube is manipulating gravity in its immediate area, and when it's activated, it lifts contestants and objects up and can be used as both a traversal tool and as an obstacle for enemy teams. And it's being used as a traversal tool because you're using it to move across the map, and it lifts objects up, which is what it's doing. But you might say that it's not meant to be a traversal tool in that way, You're only supposed to go up and down with it. The cube isn't supposed to move or whatever. But if you look at all the other gadgets and stuff like that, what they use to show what it does in the videos, it doesn't encompass everything that can be done with that gadget. And notice how when they say specific things, like for the dematerializer, they say you can create new passages and close them up. And notice how they use the term can in like almost every description. For the gateway, they use can like 10 times. Notice how they're using the word can and not saying, oh, you should use this like this. They make sure they use very vague or very open-ended words like can to show that you can use it creatively or however way you want it. So in terms of the gravity cube, you can do exactly that. It's up to you on how you want to use it. And in that way, I think that it is very supportive of the GOO ship. With patch 2.4, when they fixed the issue where some objects such as barricades could travel upwards too quickly when affected by the anti-gravity cube, you could argue that barricades being lifted by the anti-gravity cube is intended. So when the barricade does get lifted up by the gravity cube in the GOO ship, it is intended. In patch 2.8, when they made the cube heavier so it doesn't get pushed as easily when hit by other objects, GOO ship enthusiasts would probably argue that if the cube wasn't meant to be moved, why didn't the devs just make it so that when the cube is thrown, it just latches onto this first spot, or it just stays still? Or why didn't they make the anti-gravity cube a placeable instead of a throwable? And just because they made it so it's harder to be pushed around and such like that, it doesn't mean that it's not meant to be pushed around. So when it's being pushed within a GOO ship, it's not necessarily not intended, but rather it's being used in the intended way, but to the very extreme. Regarding the second part of patch 2.8, where they fixed a bug where objects would lift much faster than intended when they were attached together, this doesn't really affect the GOO ship really that much. However, when they say this also prevents an exploit in which the cube could be carried upwards together with the object is lifting, causing entire structures to traverse upwards into the sky endlessly, this doesn't seem to be in relation to the GOO ship. Notice how they say causing entire structures to traverse upwards into the sky endlessly. This doesn't necessarily mean GOO. Seems mainly geared towards when barricades or APS is on pieces of debris, pieces of buildings, and a gravity cube is somehow on that piece of the building, leading to the entire building to be floated up to the sky. And they say this is an exploit in which the cube could be carried upwards together with the object is lifting, but I assume they mean exploit in the way that it causes an entire structure to go upwards to the sky. And notice how this exploit part of the fix is under the part of the fix that is about things lifting up much faster than intended. So if things were moving as intended at a normal speed, this wouldn't necessarily be an exploit because they wouldn't traverse upwards into the sky endlessly. And notice how they literally say in the fix that this prevents the exploit in which the cube could be carried upwards together with the object it's lifting, suggesting that this bug has been fixed, suggesting that the GOO ship is not related to the bug they were fixing. Because if they have fixed the exploit or prevented the exploit in total, then that would mean the GOO ship is intended and not an exploit. Of course, there's also the clause about things being known or unknown bugs, so this still could be an unknown thing to Embark and thus still a exploit, but we will never know until they say something. And finally, if we're looking at the actual frequently asked questions about exploiting, we have to talk about whether or not it actually gives an unfair advantage to the people that use it. Even if we grant that the GOO ship is a bug, glitch, or an unintended game mechanic, we have to prove that it's also an unfair advantage. While it can be argued pretty easily that the GOO ship is an advantage, is it an unfair advantage? And there's not really much evidence to prove that it is an unfair advantage, considering it's mostly a movement tool and not really a game-winning sort of ability or tool. And so in that way, it's not really appropriate to say it's an unfair advantage. There is a certain amount of cost using barricades, using your gravity cube, using your GOO gun, and not to mention a lot of things can go wrong when making the GOO ship, which can actually make it a disadvantage in some cases. One thing to note in particular is that there is counterplay. People can use thermal bore to shoot the GOO ship out of the sky, put all the GOO on fire, render it completely useless, or just shoot the GOO ship And if you shoot at specific parts of the goo ship, it's possible the goo ship can even get destroyed just by being shot at, or the goo ship can be taken off course just by being shot at. So there's counterplay even if you're not playing a light class. There's counterplay with every class just by shooting it. Obviously, if you're running a melee weapon, there's no counterplay, but do you expect to have a counterplay with a movement tool when you're playing a melee weapon? And if we look at other exploits that have been confirmed as exploits, let's take the sword emote canceling exploit for example. And this exploit was specifically for sword lights, where they would use the lunge attack for the sword and then immediately emote or voice emote, which got rid of the animation to lunge again, which made it way quicker to use your lunge ability again, which increased the DPS of the sword light significantly. And considering that there was no counterplay to this, since this is purely done by a person's skill, and there's no way for an opponent to stop them from doing this, we can see how this is an unfair advantage in terms of an exploit. Is the goo ship an exploit? Well, I can't really say if it's definitively an exploit or not because the rules are so vague, but I would like to lean on the side that it's not an exploit or through making this video. But this was definitely an interesting look into the goo ship. I am slightly confident that it will remain a thing in the future, but even if Embark deems this as an exploit, I would argue that they would still keep it in the game just because it's so unique and creative and not very intrusive to the gameplay experience. The only people that are complaining about the goo ship are the people in my ranked matches because I'm beating them and taking their elo. The reason why I made this video was because there was a couple of people who came to my stream that were just like straight up saying it's an exploit, and when I asked them why it was an exploit, they couldn't give me like a serious answer. One guy said, you can move across the map, that's an exploit. But like at the same time, if you were to shoot an RPG across the map, would that be an exploit? He couldn't really give an argument that I could really argue against or anything. He just said something and acted as if that was just truth. Hopefully this video gives him a better argument, but I still think this is not really an exploit, especially after looking at the patch notes and looking at the actual rule. Please keep in mind that I have a conflict of interest. Even though I try to present this with not much bias, I am biased in the way that like I did create the goo ship, so it's kind of in my interest to keep it in the game. It's good for the views. Also, I've also looked into whether Embark have even noticed the goo ship, and Embark Rob has responded to a comment in Discord saying, please Rob, do not patch the goo ship if that's even possible. Embark Rob says, haha, I was laughing so loud when I saw that video. Brilliant! Exclamation point. So if Embark Rob likes the goo ship, it's, like, yeah. So yeah, that concludes my video. Comment what you guys think. Do you think it's an exploit? Do you not think it's an exploit? Let me know why. And yeah, like and subscribe. I'm hoping to get more videos out soon. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Uh-oh, Flexinus ain't gonna get up.
Alright, that's good. So yeah.
Oh, that was really good, but
Alright, we got through anyway. Jump.
the lights, there's two snipers on roof. One of them is 2-bar. Heavy got RPG'd also.